Come and play with us. Come and play with us. This is Kubrick's universe.
So many answers we may never know. Too many questions, get on with the show. No time for the chorus, only this verse. It's Kubrick's universe.
Open the podcast doors, Hal.
It's Kubrick's Universe, the Stanley Kubrick Podcast.
Hey, and welcome once again to Kubrick's Universe. Today's guest is Professor Jeremi Szaniawski, who is the editor of the new book, After Kubrick, A Filmmaker's Legacy, published by Bloomsbury and released on February 20th, 2020. Jeremi received a PhD from Yale University and is currently a professor of film at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, or as we who've lived in the Pioneer Valley call it, UMass Amherst. He is interviewed by our regular Kubrick's Universe contributor, Mark Lentz. So here you go, and take it away, Marco.
Thanks very much, Jason. So, Jeremi, I was thrilled when in your book's introduction, you were listing some of Kubrick's heir apparents, like Darren Aronofsky, the Coen brothers, Jonathan Glazer. They're already favorites of mine. You lead off with two quotes. "We're all children of Kubrick, aren't we? Is there anything you can do that he hasn't done? Paul Thomas Anderson. And the stars look very different today. David Bowie." After that, you talk about Bowie's Space Oddity being a response to 2001, and afterwards quote from the title song of his last album, Black Star. "Something happened on the day he died. Spirit rose a meter and stepped aside. Somebody else took his place and bravely cried, 'I'm a black star, I'm a black star.'" And then you continue, "In many ways, these words also express the feeling that many aspiring artists, filmmakers, or simply regular film fans felt upon learning of Kubrick's death on March 7th, 1999. A bright star in the firmament of cinema had gone out, but its light kept on reaching the world." So if I could extend that analogy, when certain stars die, they first turn into a supernova, and then they collapse back down and become a neutron star, which has an intense gravitational pull. And also in the process of being created, it expels brand new elements, which then become the building blocks of the planets and all the life on the planets. Could we say that Kubrick now exerts that same intense pull on his heirs, and that he created a new element, let's call it Kubrickium, that they are building new work with?
Well, first of all, I thank you for this lovely, for picking up on that analogy. And yes, David Bowie obviously, got his first hit with Space Oddity, which was, evidently one of the first big references in popular culture to Kubrick's work. And then Black Star, indeed, you have some resurfacing themes of the space, as a space cosmonaut there on the planet lying lifeless. So I think that Kubrick played a role in Bowie's work, no doubt, and there's other elements that can be found in the book, including the music that Bowie used during his Ziggy Stardust tour. There was music from Wendy Carlos's music for Clockwork Orange used there in the preparation for the show, and he uses some of the Natsat from Anthony Burgess' Clockwork Orange as well in some of the late songs. So there's a lot of things. There's Ashes to Ashes, which is so sort of a going back to Space Oddity's main character, Major Tom. And I think that a lot of people, not only just Bowie, a lot of artists were influenced by Kubrick, because it was hard to not be influenced by him if you were in that zone of the wherever that star shone. It was hard to ignore it. Now, a lot of artists were also not in the same galaxy, and as it were, and they don't want to look at the star. And I can tell you that a lot of artists do not like Kubrick at all. A lot of people do not like Kubrick's films at all. They find them harsh. They found them homophobic. They found them misogynistic. And we may agree or we may not agree. I think that people have a right to have their own sensitivity, and they may not want to have anything to do with the star. Now, the star does have a pull after its death, right? I mean, the gravitational pull exists, and it's hard to ignore Kubrick, and it became even harder to ignore him after his death, because there was such a strong commercial marketing event going around that. The re-release of 2001, the film by Ian Harlan, A Life in Picture, of course, the exhibition, and all these albums and books, and the imagery. So I think that indeed, maybe, I think it's fair to say that after Kubrick's death, his gravitational pull of that dead star became stronger. Now for Kubrickium, I like that, but Kubrickium can be kryptonite to some people. There's, I can tell you certain artists who really do not want to have anything to do with it, and including a lot of female filmmakers that I know. And, because I asked them, because that's definitely, it's definitely a very masculine filmmaker, and the representations that he has are not always to the liking of a lot of female filmmakers. The fixation with female breasts and things like that, among many other things. And yeah, they don't want to have anything to do with Kubrickium, and that's fine. That's fine, because we don't want to idolize Kubrick. We certainly want to appreciate the incredible achievements of his films as works of art. And there's, I think, that's not disputable. I think that is just a fact that these films are incredible works of cinematic art. But in terms of how the Kubrickium element goes into the DNA of other films, well, then some of them can be very well weeded out, or take an anti-Kubrickium antibiotic or something. And those filmmakers who have been clearly using Kubrickium from an early age, and maybe even drinking it with their mother's milk, who knows, I think that their films would be extremely different. I cannot imagine Gaspar Noé without the 2001 experience. I cannot imagine Jonathan Glazer without the same. It's hard to imagine Paul Thomas Anderson without the other Kubrick films in there. I mean, try to imagine There Will Be Blood without all the references to Kubrick. That maybe it would be a better film, I don't know, but it would be a very different film for sure, and it might not have the same epic breath to it that is very Kubrickian in essence. And all the other filmmakers that we discuss in the book, even those filmmakers who do it in a more subtle way, like the Coen brothers, we may not find the same spirit if they hadn't been inspired by, as Rodney Hill explains in the book, his spirit of independence, of his philosophical approach, his Jewish humor. All these elements are very important in Kubrick, and that the Coen brothers were heirs to, if you will, after his death. So it's a great analogy. I really like this idea of this dead star becoming a black hole and pulling things in. And doing so stronger after the death, but for how much longer? That's the question. How much longer is after the closest family members of Stanley Kubrick who knew him so well and who had at heart to make his legacy last, when they will be no longer with us, what's going to happen? Who's going to manage this incredible archive? Where the money is going to come from? Certainly Warner Brothers has already started to sell parcels of Kubrick's legacy, the way that you find the Overlook Hotel recycled in more or less tasteless ways in Ready Player One by Spielberg, or in Dr. Sleep by I'm sorry, I forget the name of this insignificant filmmaker, but it's on the one hand it's disturbing, because you're just like, wow, he certainly would not have agreed to this, and he's only been dead for 20 years, and yet they're already doing it. At the same time, we have to look at it from a nothing sacred perspective and say, this is empowering. Kubrick gave something to the world, and he did it for himself, but he did it for his fans as well. And we can use that, and it can be used in a variety of ways. And that's really wonderful, that you feel like, it's not hallowed ground. It's for us, it's for everybody. And that's where new elements filled with Kubrickium are gonna come out of, and that's a very good thing, because that means that he's now entering another level in art history, in the history of human civilization. At some point, people will not even be aware that they are quoting Kubrick, but he will be there. It's like some people picking up on certain harmonies of Bach in their music, not even being aware that that's what they were doing. So yeah, I mean, I think it's rather a good development, better than just, looking at Kubrick through a glass pane in a showcase and being like, this is sacred. We can just only look at it and pray to it, but we cannot really do anything with it. On the other hand, it's a little bit dangerous because, watch who you entrust these things to, because if they turn it to things that are, you can turn things into pastiche and it can be very amusing. You can make things that are very, very good, that are disrespectful, irreverent, a little bit iconoclastic. That is just fine, I think. But you have to be careful with things that get just tasteless and garish, because then people might get confused. And I think that, if it's an isolated event, that's fine. But if it starts to becoming a regular recurrent event, then you may lose what made the original interesting. And that's when you fall into just outright bland kitsch. And I think that Kubrick knew how to play with kitsch. And I think he was very keenly aware of what reproduction, imitation meant. But I think that he was always very aware of it. And when the people are not aware of it, then it just becomes this unaware kitsch, which is dangerous because it waters down the source text and the original ideas.
Let's start going through the book, if we can, to give people an idea of what's in it. And Jeremi, would you be able to kind of just walk us through the chapters and just give a little idea of what each is about?
I will do this very gladly, since this is the purpose of the show today, as far as I'm concerned. And thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for allowing me to talk about the book. The book starts with a rather comprehensive introduction, which does at the same time cover all the chapters and talk about these issues, some of which we just talked about. And then the first chapter of the book is by the late Thomas Elsasser, who unfortunately passed away in December. And that is an updating of a piece that he did in 2004 when the first exhibition happened in Frankfurt. So the first Kubrick exhibition. And it's a wonderful chapter that, is really one of the big, important texts written in English about Kubrick, in which Elsasser shows how Kubrick was a filmmaker of the extremes and also a filmmaker that was a little bit off in terms of the temporality that he found himself in terms of how he tackled genres, how they came a little bit above, before the crest of the wave or a little bit after. And then I asked Thomas, and I said, it would be wonderful if we could update this piece that came out 15 years ago and talk about those filmmakers that are influenced by him. Because at the time, when he wrote in 2004, he only mentioned Quentin Tarantino, I think that was it, and Lars von Trier. And so I said, there's all these other people, and we talked about it. We had a great exchange over it last summer, and he penned another 2,000 words for the piece, and I think it's one of the important texts on Kubrick in English, no doubt, very definitive. I'm very sad that Thomas, who was really looking forward to reading the introduction of the book, couldn't do that. The second chapter is by Nathan Abrams, who you had as your guest here with Robert Kolker some weeks ago. And Nathan, as you know, has this wonderful book called Stanley Kubrick, New York Jewish Intellectual. It's not his only book about Kubrick, but it's one of them. And I asked him to talk about Jewish filmmakers influenced by Kubrick. And there he writes about Mike Leigh, he writes about David Mamet, he writes about Darren Aronofsky, and he writes about the Coen brothers, among other people. He also writes briefly about Jonathan Glazer, but he doesn't talk so much about the Glazer because he considers that the aforementioned filmmakers have this Talmudic approach. The way they work with Kubrick and Kubrick text is in essence Talmudic, and he thinks that Glazer would be Jewish, of course, but not Talmudic in practice, in method. It's a terrific piece and a terrific companion to Nathan's book, Stanley Kubrick, New York Jewish Intellectual, which I think is really, up there in terms of research about Kubrick and in terms of insight into a very important element of Kubrick's life and career and religion, obviously, even if he was not religious. He was culturally Jewish, and that's an element that cannot be overlooked. So I'm very happy that we have that chapter. The third chapter is by Professor Rodney Hill from Hofstra University, and it's about the Coen brothers. And it's a wonderful investigation of the spirit of independence, the philosophical spirit that connects Kubrick and the Coen brothers. And it's I think one of the most stimulating chapters, because it really shows you how even in filmmakers who are not necessarily readily associated with Kubrick, you can find that the connection is very strong indeed, almost like, father and sons. Beautiful piece. And also, Rodney points to quotes that are there for fans to recognize, but are not in your face, if you see what I mean, in the Coen brothers films, in Raising Arizona, among other places, in their filmography.
You posted an article for us to read, and it had some pictures, such as the bathroom from Raising Arizona. Are there pictures in your book? Yes, there are pictures in the book. It's, obviously the pictures are in black and white, but you will find these pictures to back up the analysis. And Rodney's actually chapter features most pictures because it's a very important element of his analysis. I also just remembered that in your introduction you mentioned that Ridley Scott loved the reflection of the leopard's eyes with the front projection, and that's replicated in Blade Runner. I had never heard that. Yes, I that's my find. Ridley Scott is obviously the first major Hollywood. He was British, but Hollywood, British filmmaker working in Hollywood to make references to Kubrick. And if you watch his films closely, and I only just I picked Blade Runner because it may be his most famous film or maybe his most cult film, but really Scott's films are filled with references to Kubrick. There is The Duelist is obviously filled with references to Barry Lyndon, and I like the idea that there might be a playful dialogue between Kubrick and Scott, because in The Duelist you have that scene when they're in Russia, Carradine and Keitel, and they find those French soldiers frozen in the snow. And it's very, very similar to the ending of The Shining with Jack in the Labyrinth. And, that doesn't come, certainly doesn't come from Stephen King's novel. So I felt, what if Kubrick, who watched so many films in preparation for The Shining, actually said, I like this idea. I'm going to freeze somebody in the snow here. And this guy just did a film that tries to be an homage or a rip-off of Barry Lyndon. So let's do a little dialogue here. And yes, Blade Runner is filled with references to the Shining and to 2001: A Space Odyssey. The hotel room or the apartment of Deckard, Harrison Ford, is an inversion of the room 237. The rear projection is very striking, and it's been used. It's clever because Scott uses it for the replicants. That their eyes gleam not like human eyes, just like that leopard eye gleams in a very, very striking way because of the front projection in 2001. So definitely Scott is one of those filmmakers. Also John Carpenter, also James Cameron, those big Hollywood filmmakers who have been quoting Kubrick in that way. And there's other ways of doing that. So shall I continue with the walkthrough of the chapters? Yes, I just wanted to say though that one of the things I love about the introduction and how you're explaining the book is you're hanging off all these other directors and films off Kubrick, whom I love, and getting me excited about making sure that I watch all these other films, such as Birth. There's a lot of films that I've heard about, but now I'm going to watch them because you're giving me enough of a connection that I know it's going to pay off. I'm very happy, and indeed, it's one way to go in these films to say, okay, here we are in Kubrickium territory, and let's look for the Kubrickium here, and let's see how it played out. Let's see what it yielded. And Jonathan Glazer is definitely one of the most striking Kubrickian heirs or epigones, and his film Birth is lovely, absolutely lovely. It's got also things from Buñuel you will see, but there's direct quotes there's at least 7 direct quotes from Kubrick in there. So it's like a game, like you're going in there and you're finding your pieces of the puzzle. Very, very fun way to engage with these films. And thank you so much for saying this, because I think that's one of the points of the book, is to introduce important 21st century auteurs to the readers and through the Kubrickian keyhole or lens.
You know that I loved Sean. You know, so much. It's taken me this long, and I can't get him out of my system. I can't. Too many memories. I understand that this is gonna sound crazy. I've met somebody who seems to be Sean.
Am I to understand that 10-year-old boy told you he was your late husband, Sean?
He said, "It's me, Sean. What am I supposed to think?"
He's back.
What do you want?
You'll be making a big mistake if you marry Joseph.
There's a boy this tall who wants to marry my fiancée.
You're hurting me. Don't bother me again.
From now on, we're going to tell the truth.
What do you want to know?
How did Sean meet Anna?
We met at the beach. We got married 30 times in 30 days.
How do you know what you know?
I'm Sean.
You can't go around saying you're somebody you're not. What are you doing?
I'm looking at my wife.
This is insane. I mean, I don't want to fall in love again with Sean, and that's what's happening.
You can think whatever you want. Everybody can think what they want. I'm who I say I am.
Stay away. Stay away.
You ask Anna who she loves more, me or Joseph. Go ahead. Go ask her.
And amusingly enough, there was a top 100 of the best films of the last 2 decades that came out, I think, in The Guardian. And There Will Be Blood and Under the Skin, so the film by Paul Thomas Anderson and by Jonathan Glazer with Scarlett Johansson, came first and second. So, The Guardian, of course, it's a left-wing British publication, and you can see how even there, the shadow or the ghost of Kubrick is very, very strong, because I'm not sure that these people who did those polls were quite aware of what they were doing, but still, the films that came up first are two of the most Kubrickian movies, so two of the most post-Kubrickian movies of the 21st century. So I think that says a lot about the influence of Kubrick in Great Britain. Now, the fourth chapter in the collection is by a colleague from France, Pierre-Simon Gutmann, who is actually, he teaches film, but he also is an editor for L'Avant-Scène Cinéma, which is a film journal even older than Cahiers du Cinéma and Positif, and still, continuously running to this day. And I asked him to write about Yorgos Lanthimos, the Greek weird wave filmmaker, who is also eminently Kubrickian. And I have to say, I did, bring certain things to Pierre Simon's attention, and he delivered a beautiful piece on the Kubrickian elements in The Killing of the Sacred Deer and The Favorite particularly. And it's pretty inescapable, because when you think of The Killing of the Sacred Deer, you think of those the tracking shots and steady cam shots and this sort of weird family atmosphere that is both borrowing on Eyes Wide Shut and The Shining, and the horror that is being injected in this sort of mundane family environment.
We don't have to worry about nothing, 'cause we got the fire and we're burning one hell of a something. They're gonna see us from outer space.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about Bod.
It's nothing serious.
No, it is.
Like we're the stars of the human race.
Where did you two go?
When the lights started out, they don't know what they heard. Strike the match, play it loud, giving love to the world.
How did his father die?
A surgeon never kills a patient. An anesthesiologist can kill a patient, but a surgeon never can.
'Cause we got the fire.
Don't be scared, Mom. You'll see. You won't be able to move either. So get used to it.
Where is she? What did you do to her?
We're gonna let it burn, burn, burn.
I don't understand why I should have to pay the price. Why my children should have to pay the price.
It's the only thing I can think of as close to justice.
We can light it up, so they can put it out, out, out.
And in The Favorite, it's almost like Barry Lyndon with female characters, and the camera movements and the wide-angle lenses from Clockwork Orange, which is very funny. It's very, very keen. The film is very keen on you borrowing on these and saying, yes, I see the Kubrick here.
The Queen is an extraordinary person.
They were all staring, weren't they? I can tell even if I can't see, and I heard the word fat, and ugly.
No one but me would dare, and I did not. She's been stalked by tragedy.
Everyone leaves me and dies.
I apologize for my appearance. I hoped I might be employed here by you. As something.
A monster for the children to play with, perhaps. Sometimes it is hard to remember whether you have loaded the pellet or not. I do fear confusion and accidents.
The flavor is a breeze that shifts direction all the time.
As it turns out, I am capable of much unpleasantness.
Do not shout at me, I am the queen.
And for once, act like one.
I could not just stand by and let you destroy me.
You are enjoying all of this, aren't you? If you do not go, I will start kicking you. And I will not stop.
My dear friend, how good to see you've returned from
hell. I'm sure you shall pass through it one day.
And Lanthimos, that's the more important part, perhaps, of the chapter. Gutmann explains to us how in Kubrick there's that humanistic perspective that takes the victim into account. There's something about being a victim being not discarded. But in Lanthimos, it's a very sort of cinema for the neoliberal age, cinema for the cutthroat age. And his films do not look at victims as such. It looks at them in a much more cynical, colder way. And that's, let's say, Lanthimos' own take on that cinema that Kubrick produced, a cinema that can be brutal, that can be violent, but that still has a strong humanistic element. And I think that for all of us, the most striking examples would be Paths of Glory and Barry Lyndon. And in the case of Lanthimos, these films, you come out of them and there is no redemption. The characters may not die, but there is certainly no redemption for them. And then there's also the important grotesque aspect, which is something that James Naremore has pointed out in his long and establishing book on Kubrick and this aesthetics of the grotesque. Well, Rodney Hill writes about at length in the Coen brothers case, and Pierre Simon writes it about in the case of Yorgos Lanthimos. And I was very excited to have a whole chapter about Lanthimos because I also wanted to have some European filmmakers in there, and not just British. So we managed to do that. The fifth chapter is my chapter, and it's about time in Kubrick. I invite people to read it because it takes a lot of time to read. It's a long-winged chapter, and I write about dimensions of time in the films of Jonathan Glazer, specifically in Under the Skin, in the temporality of drifting, in permanent distraction, which has become a little bit of the mode in the 21st century, where you are driving or drifting on highways, driving and drifting through shopping malls, driving and drifting or surfing, watching TV and being on the internet. And this is very much what these strange alien characters played by Scarlett Johansson in the film is a little bit like. She's sort of like this deadpan, blank, drifting being, and then she goes into predator mode when she finds people that she wants to literally skin.
So you live alone?
Yes.
Think I'm pretty?
I know, gorgeous.
I have a place about 30 minutes away. Come to me. When was the last time you touched someone?
I also talk about Gaspar Noé, who, like I said earlier, is a very important Kubrickian filmmaker because he became completely obsessed with 2001: A Space Odyssey, and we have a beautiful interview with him in the book where he talks about this and how this film changed his life. So it's major because it's a filmmaker who really, really readily and openly and without any shame will talk about the importance of Kubrick in his life. And each of his films has 2001 written into it. And it's remarkable because it gives his films a sense of continuity, which is quite rare among filmmakers nowadays, and maybe ever, maybe always. I write also about Christopher Nolan, and I show how, obviously, Interstellar being very much influenced by 2001 Space Odyssey in its special effects and its epic breadth, has a very different take on time. You know, if you will, I argue that in the Nolan movie universe, time is like a measure of dimension of space, and it doesn't make that much sense, but it can be navigated like space, and that's definitely not the case in Kubrick. So I show how, on the one hand, you have the sort of modernist time in Kubrick, which is time as a pure dimension, which is not space. And in Christopher Nolan's more of a postmodern approach where you spatialize time and you can navigate time. And that's exactly what the characters do in that film and other films of his.
A little late, Coop.
Yeah, we had a flash.
It's an Indian surveillance drone. Solar cells power an entire farm.
What'd you do, Murph?
She didn't do nothing.
Murphy's Law.
You're a well-educated man, Coop. And a trained pilot.
And an engineer.
The world doesn't need any more engineers. We didn't run out of planes and television sets. We ran out of food.
We must confront the reality of interstellar travel. Murph, I love you forever.
And then I finish with a film that I really adore, and I didn't expect to adore, which is Phantom Thread by Paul Thomas Anderson. Because honestly, I always saw the Kubrick in Anderson. I always saw the ambition in Anderson, and I always thought that he was obviously an incredibly talented filmmaker. But I never really liked any of his films. And then I saw Phantom Thread just because, it's still a film by Paul Thomas Anderson. You're going to see it. And I thought it was a sublime love letter to Kubrick.
You can sew almost anything into the canvas of a coat. When I was a boy, I started to hide things in the linings of the garments. Things that only I knew were there. Secrets.
Good morning.
Will you have dinner with me?
Yes. Whatever you do, do it carefully.
It has all the important humanist aspect with the same time sort of creepy human relations injected in it. And the temporality of Phantom Thread is unassuming, but it's very, very, very beautifully crafted and complex, and with strong echoes to Barry Lyndon, to Lolita. And I hope that people will enjoy reading that part of the chapter, which is at the end of my chapter, because it's my love letter to that film, as it were. And time, of course, is an important aspect in Kubrick. And my central argument is that Kubrick was fascinated and obsessed with immortality and with infinite time. That's really, his films are so dense because there is that concern. And so it's one of the things that fuels his films, is that search for something that goes beyond just space, something that goes into the realm of pure time. The sixth chapter is by Rick Warner, and it's a beautiful investigation of the sense of dread that I think a lot of people have experienced watching The Shining, but that they will also experience in certain parts of Eyes Wide Shut, and in 2001: A Space Odyssey. You have that very specific sense of menace, of impending doom, of something lurking. And Rick Warner does a beautiful comparison between distinguishing the way that Kubrick and Hitchcock have played with genre and how they have designed their own ways of creating fear, of creating suspense. And yes, this Kubrickian dread, somebody had to put a name on it. Somebody had to put their finger on it, and Rigg did. And it's a brilliant investigation. And he finishes the chapter with looking at other films, looking at the Twin Peaks revival series by David Lynch, and looking at Alex Garland's Annihilation, which also featured these elements of dread, that sense of impending doom, of end of the world, which seems to inhabit Kubrick. And that's also because Kubrick was a product of his time. He was a product of the Great Depression, and then the Cold War, and then all that angst that he certainly had that made him actually consider move to Australia at some point because of his fear of the atom bomb and the Cold War going haywire, as we know from the jocular treatment that he gave to it in Dr. Strangelove, obviously.
I heard a lecture by a photographer who said that the idea of beauty for beauty's sake has gone out of fashion, but there's another aspect to beauty, which is its dreadful, awe-inspiring aspect. So I've always found in Kubrick a great beauty in all his films, including like Full Metal Jacket, paired with this awe and dread, because it's indifferent to us humans. It's not humanistic. It's just a perception of the cold beauty of the universe. Could that be factored into this idea of Kubrickian dread, or is it more of a different way?
You put it in ways that I certainly couldn't, and thank you so much for doing this. But Rick Warner does also pick up on this idea of this something that's beyond beauty, which is the sublime. And he connects the sublime to Kant and to Edmund Burke, who were, important thinkers of that emotion, which is beyond beauty. When something is beyond your mental capabilities, your cognitive abilities, and you are overwhelmed by something, and it's not beautiful anymore. It's scary. It's beyond scary. It's dreadful in that sense. You're filled with awe and dread, as you just said. So yes, we can definitely factor that in, and it applies perfectly to Kubrick, and that's what the chapter is about.
And if I may make one more analogy, your Black Star, I feel like Kubrick's films are organized around this very bright central truth, which is like a sun. But he always interposes something in front of that truth, like an eclipse. So you see the glowing around the edges, but he's never going to show you the full thing. He's just going to show you the outside effects. And that to me is the sublime. Like you can't ever show people the exact truth. It's too much, but you can hit all around the edges.
That's a brilliant analogy. And I think that's exactly what is going on, that he knew far more than he let on, but he knew also that suggesting these things was more powerful than trying to show them, which would be impossible anyway, because people would not understand.
Yes.
So that's very much it. That's one of the great strengths of Kubrick, and that's why Deleuze, saw him also as the brain filmmaker, the cinema as brain, because you're dealing with these things. Then speaking of brain and speaking of Kubrick, the 7th chapter of the book engages with artificial intelligence and sentience of machines, and that's by the wonderful scholar from Yale, Marta Figlerovich. And she just, she brings the house down with incredibly thoughtful considerations about what it must be to relate to machines, but what it must be for machines to relate in films that are directly influenced by 2001: A Space Odyssey, including, of course, AI by Spielberg, and, of course, Ex Machina by Alex Garland, where we have robots who are essentially artificial intelligences, who are essentially the main agents of the film. And yes, it's a wonderful new, I think, approach. It does deal with a very rigorous historic treatment and analysis of where artificial intelligence stemmed from, and it mixes it with a very, very robust philosophical approach of what it must be to be a sentient being when you are not human. So that's really one of the highlights of the book, that chapter by Marta Figlerovich. Now, the 8th chapter is by Adrian Daube, a very, very young and very talented professor at Stanford, who specializes in a lot of things, but among certain things that he specializes in, one of them is film music. And so I asked him to write about film music in Kubrick and how that's very, very unforgettable, inimitable in a sense, but also very often imitated, use of temp tracks, that is to say, of music that pre-exists to the film and then is being used in the film to create this ballet-like or this choreographic compositions. Of course, we remember them perfectly from 2001, A Space Odyssey, A Clockwork Orange, Barry Lyndon, The Shining, and also Full Metal Jacket to an extent, even though that's not classical music. Well, Adrian looks at the history of that temp track phenomenon, how Kubrick wiggled his way around to not use Alex North's score for 2001 and just retain the music that he had in mind all along, the Ligeti music, the Strauss and Strauss music, and the Khachaturian. And that was a game changer. It definitely was one of the big revolutions in film music, maybe the most important one in the history of cinema so far. And a lot of filmmakers pay homage to Kubrick because whenever somebody does that, whenever somebody uses a piece of classical music as a temp track, he is channeling Kubrick. And some people do a horrible job. Some people do a very interesting job. And Adrian looks at filmmakers who have been doing this. He looks obviously at Lars von Trier. If you think of the opening of Melancholia, he looks at Terrence Malick, who is, one of the most well-known filmmakers who does use temp tracks for his poetic Emersonian compositions. But he also looks at less famous filmmakers, and this tendency of using temp tracks, which Kubrick designed, well, it has been around for a long time. And I would add here that some people do it in certain ways, which is putting the music on top of the image as some sort of veneer, and some filmmakers inject it from underneath, doing their own take. And I wish there had been a little more discussion of that, but Tarantino is a filmmaker who has a very ambivalent relationship to Kubrick. On the one hand, he clearly, he steals from everybody, and he clearly stole from Kubrick, but when we think of Tarantino, we do not think of Kubrick that much. However, if you watch his films closely, you will see that there's echoes of Kubrick in many places. For instance, you remember in Pulp Fiction when Bruce Willis shoots John Travolta in the bathroom. And then there is a tracking shot and a hand that opens the bathroom door. And that's a direct reference to the hand of Jack Nicholson opening the bathroom in The Shining with that tracking shot. And the hand on, you can see the hand barely on the edge of the image pushing the door. And in the recent Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, there is a jingle from the radio show, which is very, very similar, to the one of Halloran driving and listening to the radio when he's driving through the snow. So Tarantino does take from Kubrick, but I would say that the way that Tarantino uses film music is also pre-existing music, also temp tracks, if you will, is his own thing. And that is, I think, very remarkable, is that he bypasses what Kubrick already invented. So this school of temp tracking can still find new variations and be recreated, and that's really a huge contribution of Kubrick to commercial cinema. The 9th chapter, Pansy Duncan is a terrific scholar who hails from Auckland, New Zealand. And I was lucky enough to have her as my colleague for a little while when I was teaching in New Zealand. And Pansy has the most exquisite way of unpacking ideas and of looking at film through an affect lens. She has already one monograph on the question. She has another one coming out. And she just deals with film and texture in a way that I think can only be said to be surpassed or rivaled by Jeannie Brinkema, who wrote a beautiful endorsement for our book after Kubrick. And Pansy tells us in the most provocative and intriguing way that it's not blood in The Shining. It's not blood gushing from that elevator. It's oil. That The Shining is a film that is in dialogue with the petrol crisis of the 70s, with that anxiety of oil. And she correlates the importance of oil derivative products, of petro-derivative products in so many aspects of American daily life, in the lipstick. And, the pointe or the climax of her piece is when she shows that when Wendy finds the gutted snowcat, it's the machine that has had its heart removed, as it were, that mechanical piece, and that sort of loops together oil, material and blood. And, it's a very compelling, analysis of the film, which goes to show that you can interpret The Shining in countless ways. And as long as you do it rigorously, which Pansy does, you can convince people of the things that are in this film. And it's also it's an affect approach. So she takes the film as a subject and she talks about her experience of the film as it is negotiated by this petro horror, that oily, gooey, blood-like substance. And of course, what film is one of the most famous films to quote The Shining? Well, of course, it's a film called There Will Be Blood, which is a film about oil.
Yes.
So she masterfully shows how this idea does not belong to her alone, how Paul Thomas Anderson must have felt that connection there, and that how that blood gushing from the elevator and that oil gushing from the bowels of the earth are in essence connected, because oil is murder. The industry of oil, that whole incredible machine, was also connected with war, was connected with brutal industries, was connected with cutthroat entrepreneurs. And it's a beautiful ride, I can tell you that. I don't know what that car rides on, but it definitely is a beautiful ride. And the next chapter in the book is by Danny Fairfax, who is now a professor at Goethe University in Frankfurt. And Danny looks at Room 237 and he looks at all the incredible ways in which people have interpreted The Shining. And he definitely goes down the rabbit hole. And I know that Danny is a very industrious man and he was very, very busy last year. And so he wrote the piece at night, when he had, no other obligations, when his family was asleep. He told me that he would watch those videos on YouTube of those conspiracy theories, of those secret codes and secret messages presumably contained in The Shining. And these things will make you doubt, they will put you in a state of mind where you'll be like, wait a minute. He describes his own thought process as he is lured and sucked into this conspiratorial mindset and paranoid schizophrenic mindset. It's a beautiful piece of investigative journalism, if you will. And I think people will enjoy it tremendously because it's also beautifully written. Chapter 11 is by now State Senator John Pitzeis, who I have to admit is a friend of mine from high school, but he has done well for himself. He was elected senator in Belgium last year for the Green Party, and he's a brilliant writer. He is a philosopher of law and a bona fide PhD and professor, but he also is now a politician. And he writes about politics, political opacity in Kubrick. He says, is Kubrick telling us that there are hidden things, or is Kubrick telling us that things are in plain sight for us to see, that those systems, those rules of the game are not lost on us, they are lost on some of the characters? So he looks, for instance, at Barry Lyndon and he says, Redmond Barry, he does not comprehend the rules of the game. But these rules are not secret at all. They are the rules of the aristocracy, and these rules have been codified and put into practice for centuries. And one of the rules is that you do not enter the game if you're not from the aristocracy. So it will just be an illusion for you. And you're never going to be accepted by this environment. So there's this glass ceiling that you will not go through, but you think you can because it's a glass ceiling. But the viewer knows that this glass ceiling cannot be pierced. And same thing with Eyes Wide Shut. John argues that Eyes Wide Shut is not at all about some dark secret society conspiracy. It's just about rich people having their own little games, and Tom Cruise's character stumbling upon it and being sort of uncomprehending of the game, not understanding the rules. So it's a, if you will, it's a piece that goes against the grain of all the more conspiratorial explanations of Kubrick's cinema by a politician who upholds the idea of political transparency. One of John's long-standing commitment was working for a center of political observation and analysis, and basically saying that, there's no grand schemes or grand conspiracies. It's just people. And sometimes it may just look confusing, but it's just people doing things and stumbling and, sometimes doing little petty arrangements, but there's no great project that is beyond that. So that's a chapter that maybe some Kubrick fans will definitely not agree with.
Okay.
The following chapter, I believe, is by Mircea Deața from Bucharest University, and it's a beautiful and very nimble approach of Kubrick through cognitive science. And he basically has a cognitive science approach to Interstellar and 2001, and he shows us how the two films deal with the sublime and deal with the science fiction paradigm differently from a cognitive perspective. So it's like, how do these films work? He just takes them apart from that perspective. He shows that's their mechanism. That's how they work. Let's look at how they work. It's a very enjoyable introduction for some people to this sort of film study / cognitive approach. The last few chapters, I think, the chapter 13 is by Sung-Hoon Jung. Sung-Hoon Jung is a wonderful colleague of mine who was at NYU Abu Dhabi now, is teaching the late Thomas Elsasser seminars at Columbia as we speak. And he is an absolutely incredible expert on film theory. His knowledge and breadth of Elsasser, of Zizek, of Agamben, of obviously Lacan is astounding. And he with disconcerting ease talks about biopolitics in Kubrick and how we need to read Kubrick today not as an existentialist filmmaker, the way that he was interpreted, of course, by Gerald Abrams, also by some earlier discussants of Kubrick's work, films like Paths of Glory, which was eminently picked up as an existentialist work, but also Full Metal Jacket and Dr. Strangelove. And Sung-Hoon looks at them and says, we're going to now look at them. Of course, those earlier readings were not bad. They were totally accurate, but now the time has come to look at them from a biopolitical lens, a Foucauldian lens, Michel Foucault's idea of society as a biopolitical entity. And, it's a very, very good way to show people that Kubrick evolves because his films are never dead. They are, with time we can interpret them in new ways, and the biopolitical lens is a great one. And Sung-Hoon shows us how this biopolitical lens was intuited by a lot of filmmakers who did riffs on Kubrickian ideas in the 21st century. And, of course, there is, Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers, and there is, Elysium. I don't remember who the filmmaker was of that film with, Matt Damon, District 9. I mean, a lot of science fiction films that came out in the 21st century or just before the 21st century have that very strong biopolitical aspect to them. And it was already present in Kubrick. Like Kubrick was, he thought about these things very, very, very thoroughly. And so it's already in there. It's already in Paths of Glory. And it now comes to the surface thanks to Sung-Hoon's analysis. The last two chapters of the book are no longer dealing with politics so much. They are leaning more towards the art history or museal aspect of things. And chapter 14 is by Jin-Hoon Kim, who is a professor in Korea at Chunggang University. And Ji-Hoon talks about the Kubrick exhibition, which is, of course, one of the most visible and eminent aspects of the legacy, because this exhibition has been touring the world with great success since 2004. And I don't know if you've seen it many times, but I was lucky enough to see it in France, in Belgium, in Los Angeles, and in Seoul. And each time the setup is a little bit different. each time the exhibit is a little bit different in terms of what it includes, in the representation, which is based on the space in which it takes place. And Ji-hoon explains that in the 21st century, we have moved into a dual mode of putting cinema into the art gallery. And one is the cinema of exhibition, and the other one is the exhibition of cinema. And Kubrick's exhibition is exhibition of cinema. It's showing the works, showing the paraphernalia, showing the props, showing the pictures, showing clips of the film. And the cinema of exhibition is when filmmakers actually go into the art gallery and produce things for the art gallery. And, there's been a lot of examples now. Godard did something like that at Pompidou. Chantal Akerman transformed some of her films into video installations. Abbas Kiarostami did. It's something that a lot of people are doing. Also, some gallery artists are going into the film world, like Steve McQueen, who is an artist and a gallery artist, and who did these wonderful films like Hunger and Shame. But in the case of Kubrick, in the case of Scorsese, in the case of Tim Burton, in the case of David Lynch, it's the exhibition of cinema. It's like showing these filmmakers and their films as part of a patrimony. So it's a very, very good way for readers to wrap their minds around the way in which cinema and museum have been interpolating. And then comes the final chapter of the book, which is by a very, very special contributor, which is by Alexander Nemiroff. And Alexander Nemiroff is a professor at Stanford of art history, the Carol and Marilyn Thomas Professor of Art History there. He used to be a professor at Yale. And he is not only a brilliant scholar and unparalleled lecturer and promoter of art history at those schools, but he is also the nephew of Diane Arbus. Diane Arbus, of course, was a huge source of influence on Kubrick. There is absolutely no doubt about that.
Yeah,
and we all know the twins from New Jersey that she photographed, which are literally picked up in The Shining. But there is other elements of Diane Arbus that inhabit Kubrick's universe. And there is also a very strong resonance for Alex Nemiroff in Barry Lyndon, which is a story of these brothers that ends tragically. And he tells about how the film contains in itself the drama that he himself, the tragedy that he himself experienced in his own family, and binds it together in a wonderful exploration of themes that are borrowed from literature, that come from Henry James, that come from H.G. Wells, that are found in the very delicate palette of tragic emotions and the thoughtfulness that pervades Barry Lyndon. And he also, of course, talks about Barry Lyndon from the perspective of art history, because, as you know, Barry Lyndon is not only replete with quotations of famous paintings by Constable or Turner or other important British and European painters, but there's also a lot of paintings in the film. Remember in the scene where the concert is interrupted by Lord Bullingdon bringing the young child of Redmond Barry to the party to ridicule and berate Redmond Barry. There is this salon in which they are is covered with paintings, and I think probably Alex Nemiroff is the first person to actually look carefully at these paintings, which he, in his knowledge of history of art, can recognize and tell us that they're not there at random. They each have a purpose. They each talk and are in dialogue with what's going on in the film. So, it's almost like poetry. We're no longer in the realm of sheer film scholarship. We're in something different, and it's a beautiful way to close the book, because it's no longer about filmmakers who quote Kubrick. It's about Kubrick inhabiting our lives. So I like that the book ends this way, and it doesn't really actually end this way, because there is an interview with Gaspar Noé at the end, which was conducted by my friend Pip Chodorov, who is a filmmaker and a professor at Dongguk University in Seoul. And Pip often goes to the Cannes Film Festival, and he knows Gaspar Noé because, check it out, Gaspar Noé is so obsessed with 2001 that he wants to have every single poster of the movie. And so it's a very moving thing, because obviously Gaspar Noé just had gotten the prize for Climax, and I don't think he had slept all night. I don't think he had slept all week. And he still delivered a most articulate and beautiful interview where he talks about the importance of 2001 in his life, which he saw first when he was in Argentina. He was still a child in Argentina, and he saw the film with his parents. That's kind of, it sort of takes dedication, to take your kid at like 8-year-old kid. You say, okay, let's go see this movie. And you have to read it because it's a great interview by I think the most important male French filmmaker. I mean, there are female filmmakers in France who are doing things that are tremendous and staggering, but not everybody's going to like it. But I'll stand by this. I think Gaspar Noé is the best French filmmaker in activity. Of course, Godard is still alive, okay, but let's say like of his generation, okay. So that's my opinion, and I'm very thankful to him for having given us this gracious interview about the influence of 2001 in his life. And that's it's a perfect way to close the book, because that's exactly what it is about. It's about Kubrick in our life.
Well, Jeremy, we have other questions, but they're all going to be anticlimactic after this incredible summary that you've given us of this book. I feel like I can't wait a year for the soft cover. I've got to get the hardcover, because this is going to be just a box of chocolates that I'm going to relish every chapter.
I think this book is a box of chocolate, and it's a little bit like the Forrest Gump box of chocolates, but it's also like the good box of Belgian chocolates, because it was a treat. Each chapter is a treat.
So 2 last questions about the book itself. How did you gather such a diverse group of people? And then could you just tell us a little bit about your editor, who was so helpful?
Yes. I'm very happy to do that. So first of all, because of my life path, I've been in many places, and it's not always been easy, but I can tell you that it's certainly made my life richer, and I'm extremely lucky to know a lot of tremendous people, and I was lucky to be able to bring them together on this project. The interesting thing about After Kubrick is that it's not a typical Kubrick studies book. There is only a couple real hardcore tried and true Kubrick scholars in the book, and that's Nathan Abrams and Rodney Hill, who have published tremendous scholarship on Kubrick. Everybody else was not a full-blown Kubrick scholar, and there's a very simple reason for that. One of them is that I myself was not a Kubrick scholar before embarking on this book, and so I said, let's make a book about Kubrick from fascinating perspectives by people who can write beautifully and who have a relationship with Kubrick, but who are not in that sort of network, which is the Kubrick Scholars Network, which is a network of amazing people. I think of one of my great revelations in working in this book was to read all these amazing books and chapters by these people who I then met in Leiden last summer. So that's the backstory. But you still had to include at least some people, and I reached out to Rodney and I reached out to Nathan because I thought that they would bring essential parts to the edifice, but also because I thought that they were complementing the book from that perspective. So I've been just very lucky with a lot of very generous people saying yes. That's basically what it was. Now the editor is my wonderful commissions editor at Bloomsbury is Katie Galluff, and I want to give her a big shout out because Katie is incredibly personable and efficient and generous. And we did a couple of books together. We did The Global Auteur together. We did On Women's Films together. But I would say that they were easier sells. The Global Auteur, I mean, just the title alone is kind of it's kind of like an appealing, broad appeal film studies book. On Women's Films, I did with Yvonne Margulies, who's one of the top film scholars of her generation. And we had contributors of the ilk of Laura Mulvey on this book. So you understand that it was also an easier sell. But After Kubrick was not an easy sell because it didn't have that Kubrick network of scholars, so it didn't have that sort of legitimacy. And I certainly do not have any legitimacy, or at least I didn't have any legitimacy until now to write about Kubrick. And I have to say that the blind peer reviews for the book were half and half. You know, it was like, that would say like two people wrote that, yes, this is exciting, this is fresh, this is new, nothing like this has been done before, should be done. And two were like scathing. They were like, who's this dude who writes about Russian film? He doesn't quote my scholarship. And Katie could have used that. Katie could have used that. She could have said, no, look, we don't have a consensus here. Sorry, find another publisher. But she took a chance. And I have to say, big kudos to her, because without her, it would have been, maybe the project would not have been made, or maybe it would still be in the works. So I owe her a lot on this one, and I think we're all pleased with the way it turned out. I think including the cover, which is just very handsome, beautiful cover. So everything about the process turned out well. So I have to say thank you, Katie.
Who is Stanley Kubrick?
To me, Kubrick was a revelation. To me, Kubrick was probably at one and the same time a blessing and a curse. But I think that any blessing, any revelation of that magnitude comes with its accursed share. And I think that the blessing aspect was stronger than the curse aspect. But I certainly erred for a long time trying to be a filmmaker, and that's probably his fault. So I wasted a bit of my life, erring on the wrong side of the tracks, if you will. But yeah, I'd say that that's pretty fair. Yes, Kubrick is a revelation, and he is not in equal parts a blessing. He's definitely a blessing to all cinephiles, and a curse because it comes with its toll. Like becoming a Kubrick fan becomes a burden sometimes.
Okay, very cool stuff. Hey, big thanks to Jeremi for taking the time to speak with us. His new book, After Kubrick, A Filmmaker's Legacy, from Bloomsbury Publishing, is available now on Amazon and many other booksellers. We've got some great new episodes coming your way very soon, including a very special surprise show for our members at the Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society on Facebook, an insider's look at working on Full Metal Jacket with a man who was there, Adrian Bush, and for the 21st anniversary of Kubrick's passing, one which will feature a fond look back at the reactions shared by many first-generation internet users at that time, in, of course, the pre-social media age of chat rooms and message boards. I'd like to thank our producer, Stephen Rigg, researcher and contributor James Marinaccio, and of course, our friend Mark Lentz for conducting this interview. Until next time, it's your host and humble narrator Jason Furlong saying, hey, let's meet up at the Korova Milk Bar sometime and toast to Stanley with a glass of, a cup of tea. Thanks for listening. See ya.
It's Kubrick's universe. We just live in it.
We have taken very thorough precautions in this podcast against broadcasting anything which might only be attributed to human error.
Thank you for listening to the Stanley Kubrick Podcast. Come back soon.
This show comes to you from the Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society.